I ran into Amy yesterday and I said, tough gig, we're up against you at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And she's like, oh, at the very most, you'll get a focus group.
Yeah,
So
we do. We have, but the best focus group, right?
The best. And you know what? We're breaking a few rules here with the live recording, and that's why we've got microphones, because we're recording this into the live feed. So there are a few microphones that are going around, and the good thing about having a focus group is that everyone gets to participate, and we can have a great conversation around failing fast and building startups. So my name is Alan Soon. I started a media company in Singapore that covers basically the transformation of media in Asia. We hope one day to be the Neiman Lab of Asia, and so we've got a few stories as well of how to fuck up. I'll be the first to swear, just so that both of you can do that and everyone else can join in.
I feel so relieved.
Exactly. You could not do that at Amy Webb session, I can tell you that. So I've done this for about 2 years. I've been a career journalist for about 2 decades, TV, radio, newswire, magazines, and all that. Eventually, 2 years ago, decided that it was time to go and build something of my own, and that's where I am today. But this is really not about me. It's about these two wonderful people here, about their stories, about how they've walked into entrepreneurship. Do we actually walk into it, or do we jump into it?
I think dive head first is really the best way.
Yeah. So, Janine, why don't you go first? Tell us about what you do, how it all came together, and basically the story of your entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Alan. I really appreciate it. I started my career as a bilingual journalist. I like to call myself a journalist turned geek turned entrepreneur. Sometimes I say I speak 3 languages, English, Spanish, and tech. Today I run an international nonprofit dedicated to supporting other digital journalists. I have 22 people in the region of Latin America and Spain. We've been mapping digital media entrepreneurs all over the region. We've just produced the most comprehensive report on digital media. She's quoting it here in the US, which makes me think we're onto something. I think if you haven't seen the report, I'll make sure you get the URL before the end. Really has application all over the world. But I thought I'd take today and tell the backstory, because my organization turned 2 October 1st. Yeah, you can cheer, happy birthday.
Yay.
Summer Media, we turned 2 years old. And I think I'm doing it a little better this time in terms of startup. But it really started more than 20 years ago in Northern California. And I graduated from college with a degree in Spanish and journalism and set off to use my Spanish in Northern California. And I spent a couple years working for this little newspaper doing interviews in Spanish and writing stories in English. And after about 2 years of this, I started to realize that the Spanish speakers needed the information more than the English speakers. That as an English speaker, I was incredibly fortunate to have grown up with so many sources of information. And that there really was nothing in Northern California 20-some years ago in Spanish for people who were living there and didn't speak English. And so I went to my boss, who was a very progressive, wonderful man. Marin County, Northern California, if you know, is a pretty progressive part of the country. And I said, we should do more in Spanish. There was this little tiny Spanish column this Mexican colleague of mine was doing. It was kind of a throwaway in the paper. And I said, we should actually do a whole section in Spanish. And so Victor Reyes, my friend from Mexico, and I started doing this monthly insert in Spanish. And we wrote about everything from the advent of bilingual education in the schools. All of a sudden, 20% of the students were native Spanish speakers, and this well-intentioned community didn't quite know how to deal with that. And there was a lot of stories about that weren't getting communicated to the parents of these students. And we wrote about consumer fraud. If you work at all with immigrants, they're incredibly vulnerable to all kinds of scams because they're so naive. And we weren't advocacy journalists. We were certainly trying to be fair and balanced journalism, but we used whatever was happening in the community to guide what we thought they needed to know about. And there was a particularly important series of stories for me that was about agriculture in the area. And it's no surprise to you that most of the ranch workers in Northern California were from Mexico. And unlike other parts of the world where they kind of migrate with different seasons, in Northern California it was dairies and cattle ranches and chicken ranches, and people actually came and stayed and brought their families and lived on the ranches. And there was a series of stories that I had seen over the years that we'd written about more in English than Spanish to that point, where somebody would get injured on the ranch, and instead of getting taken care of, they'd get fired and evicted. And if they were really lucky, they'd find their ways to a place called California Rural Legal Assistance, which was this amazing group of pro bono attorneys in Northern California that would represent them. And a typical case was, yep, you were unfairly fired, we'll get you a $10,000 settlement, you'll go back to Mexico and hopefully live on that for the... just as we had started this little Spanish section, about 3 or 4 months into it, one of the attorneys from this group got a really brilliant idea. And she realized she could file a class action suit arguing unfair business practice. And if you think about this, what she said was, if you're not paying your workers at least minimum wage, giving them vacations, all the things that are laws. And by the way, a lot of these workers were legal residents. Some of them were not. But the brilliance of this suit was it wasn't filed on behalf of the workers. It was filed as an unfair competition to the other ranchers in the community. And all of a sudden, it was a $500,000 lawsuit. And all of a sudden, all the other ranchers who probably weren't following the rules either started paying a lot more attention to labor laws. And so we covered this for a couple issues, and I had many interviews with her, as you might imagine. And in kind of a moment of confidence, she turned to me at one point and she said, you know, you should know something that happened last week. And I said, what? She said, well, I was at one of these meetings with the ranchers, and I overheard them as we were getting ready for the meeting. One of them said, do your workers know their rights? And the other guy said, I don't know, but I found this Spanish paper on the ranch and I'm worried. And I thought, this is why I'm a journalist. This is it. This is why I do this. I'm making a difference. And about a week later, my boss called me into his office and he said, you know, this little Spanish section is a really sweet idea, but you know, I only have 3 reporters and you're spending more and more time on it. And
Wow.
I just don't think we can afford to keep doing it. And I thought, I have to. And I was a little worried because some of his previous journalism people had left and tried to start competing papers. And I didn't ever want him to think I was doing that. So I snuck around for about 2 months talking to everybody I knew. Would you help me do this? If we made it a nonprofit, maybe we could make it work. Would you be on my board of directors? Would you help? And I got a group to give me a free office on the other side of the county where there were actually more Spanish speakers. And I got 10 people to say they'd be on a board. And I came back to my boss and I said, this group of people thinks I should keep doing this. And he said, wow, that's awesome. Would you like to use our facilities on the weekend to put it together? And I said, wow, that'd be amazing. And so I begged, borrowed, and stole my way into an office and a production facility and a
Wow.
dark room. And because I'd worked on a small paper, I knew just enough about everything. I mean, I literally made the media kit and started calling people saying, you're advertising in the weekly. Would you like to advertise in the New Spanish? And some people said yes. And some people said, I don't want more of those people in my store. And for 3 years, I ran this little bilingual newspaper with my partner from Mexico. We had more than 100 volunteers, editors from the 2 dailies. Our circulation grew many, many times over. I think we did a lot of stories of great impact. And as a business, it was a complete and utter failure. Printing was our biggest expense.
Right.
I paid myself $1,000 a month to live in a basement in Marin County.
absolutely.
I mean, really. And I was the second highest paid person, my ad rep, of course, was the highest paid person. But I finally, after 3 years, just had to realize that we'd kind of exhausted all options. I got one little $5,000 grant, hired an intern, you know. That kind of ran out, and my second ad rep was moving away with her husband, and I just realized we were all kind of killing ourselves trying to do it. And I had to close it, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And I spent the next 6 months just being depressed and thinking, I don't want to just go work for another newspaper. And I discovered this thing called the internet. And I went, oh my God, this is going to change everything. You know, I can publish for $20 a month. That's a lot less than my printing bill. And you can get information on demand. And I just saw this future. And I started setting out to learn everything I could about HTML.
What year
and
was this?
all of that. This was 1995 when I closed
Wow.
that paper. And so I'll stop there and just say 20-some years later, I am really driven. And I've been really lucky to have high-level jobs at the Miami Herald and run my own consulting business with a fair amount of success and write 25 books like Websites for Dummies and some things like that that have really helped me learn how to do marketing, how to manage sales teams, how to do all the business stuff that lead me today to run an organization that's dedicated to helping well-intentioned journalists with the business and technology that most of us suck at. And I really believe you don't have to suck at business just because you're a journalist. And that really drives me. But a lot of people have never heard that backstory. And that Sembra Media comes from this really personal place and this really personal experience. And now I'm trying to pay that forward. So thank you so much for letting me share that story.
Wonderful.
Yay.
Rebecca.
So
let's
now
hear
you
your
have a
story.
heartwarming
Now she's gonna make me
story
laugh.
about a crusading journalist
Tell
who's
us your
done
mission.
good. Yeah, I mean, I also failed out of journalism, basically. A lot of you guys knew me in my former life, right? I started out my career as a page designer. And I loved that job because it meant that I got to touch like every part of a story. I got to be involved in the photo edit, and I got to be involved in the copy editing and the headline writing, and like how we share this stuff with readers, and how we make things more impactful, and all of this stuff. And it teaches you that job, while it is rapidly disappearing. It teaches you so much about news judgment and all of that stuff, and just like all of journalism, basically. And you're working with ad people and special sections and all of that, and it was fun. And then, they decimated the design desk, like as they did everywhere else in America, and it was sort of like, shit, like what am I gonna do now? And I kind of took like every job in the newsroom, basically. Like I went over to the web team. This was like at the dawn of social media. Some of you guys are like, what, 12 years old? I don't know, 15? I don't know. So you haven't been alive without Twitter, but there was a time, right, when Twitter was like this new thing and you actually used it via SMS. And that was about this time. And so it became my job to be like, hey, how are these, all the children seem to be talking on their phones in weird ways. Like, can you help us do that? And so I did that for a while, and we were experimenting with fun stuff that like all the big guys were doing already. Like we were doing live blogging, and we were doing, different kinds of social media coverage, and like tweet ups started, and we were having tweet ups like with our people from the newspaper, and so that was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about building communities online there, and I loved that part of the work. And I also learned about fun digital media things like chasing traffic and SEO and all of this other stuff that's just part of like doing business on the internet. And eventually, though, I was like, I don't know if any of you guys remember the Sam Zell era of Tribune. This was that era, so it was kind of a rough time for this company, and things were changing a lot, and there were just like layoffs like every 3 months, and eventually I was like, man, I really just want to go, I can't do this anymore, like I want to go do something different, and they let me become a beat reporter and cover a city, which was also amazing, and taught me a lot about government, got me really into like very nerdy gov stuff and whatever, but I kept like switching jobs, right? And I kept being like, oh, like let's train everyone how to do video, I can do that, right? Like, or I can help everyone learn how to use our CMS better or whatever, because I was always like in nerd things the whole way through, like I like computers, right? But I kept switching jobs, and it was just like I could not find the place where like I didn't want to like pull my hair out, and I was going to work every day, and I was like, I like the work I'm doing, but I felt very hopeless, right, about a lot of things, about not necessarily about the industry in general, but just sort of about the corporate leadership at the company I was in, and like how, where the priorities were going, because everyone, at this point in time was like super frantic. It was just like, you guys who were working at that time remember it. It was just like this terror moment, and it wasn't like I felt like I was like at risk of getting fired or anything like that. It was just like this was like not good for my soul at a point, and I was like, man, I'm just really not cut out for this industry anymore. So I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And I decided that I wanted to go to graduate school. But also, I'm in journalism, so I can't pay for graduate school. Are you crazy? So I got a job at a university because they would pay for me to go to graduate school, and that was a benefit, right? And I could work all day and then go to take classes at night and stuff like that. And that was great, right? Like it was that reset moment that I needed to be like, what do I really want to do? Well, it turns out I really want to do journalism. Damn. Like really bad scene. Like I started doing all the stuff to do like computer science and all of this, and I started a great MFA program at the University of Miami in interactive media, where I was like learning all this amazing stuff about game design and systems design and UX UI and all this stuff, and I just wanted to use it to like do news nerd things, right? So it was sort of this thing around like, your heart's gonna guide you, and you're gonna like fall on your face in the process of that. And over time, like while I was doing this stuff and working at the university, like I started a Hacks Hackers chapter in Miami, and we were doing programming around how to do news nerd things. And then I started the Code for Miami Brigade, which is like a civic hacking brigade. So it was like, how do we get open data and how do we get open government in the city, and like all of this stuff that was like filling my bucket, because as much as I loved like doing comms for a university college like wasn't filling my well, so I found other ways to do it. Yeah. And then eventually I started doing meetups with my friend Chris, and this is like extra nerdy, but you're all here, so I'm sure you'll appreciate it. We were like, hey, we should do have you heard of the Awesome Foundation? So they give away like $1,000 grants for like small experimental projects. And so we were like, hey, we should do that, but around city problems, right? Yeah. So it's like we would have these meetups, and we'd do design thinking for like 2 hours to find like small scale, like $1,000 solutions to big city problems. Like, how do we get more people to ride transit? Or what are we gonna do about sea level rise? Or how do we make people's commutes not suck? So it was like really like civic nerdery, but there were all these people who kept showing up. Like we'd get like 100, 200 people, and there would just be like pizza and beer and like Post-its. Like, really? Like, this is why you guys are coming? But through doing that, like we learned about a sort of need, particularly among young people in this city who had like a lot of them had like, I just moved back from New York and everyone's stupid here and blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, yeah, and it's like, no, really, like, we're not stupid here. Like, you were just hanging out with the wrong people. and so we would find each other, right, in these little meetups. But we realized there was like a media problem there, because like all these people had this great interest in like being a part of the city and like understanding its problems and understanding the context of where they lived, but they weren't subscribing to the daily paper. They were reading things that came through their feed, right? So it was just like sort of whatever their friends were reading, they were reading, and all their friends lived in New York. So what do you think they were reading? Like, not the Miami Herald, right? So it was like, all right, how do we help solve some of these problems? And out of that is how like Where By Us kind of grew up. Yeah. But it took all of those things of like, I can't do traditional journalism anymore. Like, it's killing me, right? And then, I'm gonna go to grad school. And then I had to give up grad school to start a business, which is like, it seems like, oh yeah, no big deal. But like for me, it was like, I'd been working on this dream for like 5 years of like, how am I gonna go to grad school? And like, how am I gonna pay for it? And how am I gonna take classes? And then it's like, oh shit, like this idea I had, people like it. So now I have to give up that thing too. And it's just this constant like, reinvention cycle. Yeah. And it's sort of like what you were saying with, these stories are really common. Like people who are misfits tend to end up in these jobs. Like people who can't find a place in the existing system are the only ones stupid enough to go and like try to make new things. But it's really fun. It's a fun thing to do.
No, I agree. I think everyone's got the same kind of story. We all get to a point where we get so frustrated by just the way things work, and we get to the point where we hate it so much. There's a disdain for what's out there and the way things are structured, and we're like, let's go do something different.
Yeah.
But tell me a bit about how you look at failure. How will you define failure for yourself and for your company?
Well, I was just going to say, I think I've seen sort of two paths to entrepreneurship. One of them is whatever, this total misfit and I don't quite work here and it doesn't work. And the other is I'm just drawn to this thing that I feel compelled to do. And I think you're actually kind of a combination of those.
Maybe.
Like maybe being a misfit is what led you to something you were so drawn to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of people in Silicon Valley and others say that, you kind of have to fail at something before you can succeed.
Right.
It's almost a badge of honor now to sort of have tried something and learned from it so that the next time maybe you bring that experience and that knowledge.
And do you accept that? Do you accept that needs to be the process in which we
God,
learn?
No, please. You don't have to fail on the way. If you go straight to success, I'm happy to support you with that. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs find it incredibly reassuring to find out that they're not the only ones that feel like a failure sometimes. Right. And the other thing I've seen, I have a slide I use when I talk with entrepreneurs that has, and you may have seen it, it's like what people think success is, and it's this straight line to the top, and then what success really looks like, and it's this like meandering thing.
Right.
And I often say, if you have days when you feel like you could conquer the world. And then you have other days when you like don't even want to leave your bedroom.
Yeah.
That's entrepreneurship. That's really normal, and that's really okay to feel that way. And I can't tell you how many journalists especially say, oh my God, really? I'm not the only one that's not this like super confident entrepreneur gonna conquer the world and everything I do turns to gold. So I think failure is maybe even the wrong word.
Right.
But feeling like you don't have to be successful immediately or perfectly or with every endeavor is really crucial to the experimentation and just the wild ride of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. Like, I think, look, Silicon Valley, like, reveres failure like a cult. Like, it's really, like, creepy. But also, like, there's some truth to it. I think we are in an industry that is very opposite of that. Like, for an industry that says that it's trying to, like, innovate and, you know, save journalism, which I swear to God, y'all, like, it's fine. Like, not everything needs to be saved. Like, some things do, but not all of it, and that's okay. But, like, there's all this stuff, this rhetoric that we talk about, like, this is the most important job in the world, and it's a super important job. Like, don't get me wrong. But there's a very, very low risk tolerance in our industry. And I've had conversations a million times in the past 3 years since we started the company of like, what the fuck am I gonna do if this thing goes sideways, right? Because I don't know, like I don't really fit into a traditional newsroom anymore. Like I'm pretty sure that if I fail out of this, like my next job may not even be in media, right? And that is the thing that like, of all the stuff that I hope that like you guys who care enough to be here and talk about this and be open and honest about what's really happening in your careers and your life and whatever, like we need more people to be champions of it's okay. And if you screw up, like there is value in the thing that you learned from that, and we will use it somewhere else. In the Valley, like and in tech in general, like that's a thing. Like people, investors love it when they see a tech entrepreneur who has had a failed startup, right? Because it means like, oh shit, they're not gonna make the same boneheaded, like beginner mistakes that every startup founder makes. Like literally every one of us makes the same mistakes over and over, and like you have to learn how to hire, and you have to learn how to scope your shit, and you have to learn how to do all these things that if you've done it once and it didn't work out, like you've learned those things. And we don't do that in journalism. We talk a great game about it, but we do not do it. And there's a lot of like big organizations that have like these innovation teams, and then one person leaves and they disintegrate, right? And that's because there was such a low tolerance for failure that this idea that we needed a team to do innovative work can't exist without this one person. And we've got to get past that, I think, as an industry, not just in startups, but like throughout everything. And so when we talk about failure, like I wish we would call it failure more. Like I wish we would have retrospectives of things that fall flat at our organizations all the time, instead of just being like, oh, let's not talk about it, right? And then, 6 years later, there's a conversation of like, hey, we should do this. And so it was like, oh no, we did that once and it was terrible. And it's like, well, I mean, why was it terrible? You know, like we're not in that cycle of trying to learn in the same way that I think the tech industry maybe to the other extreme is, right?
Well, I still say I'm not sure failure is the right word, because, I mean, kind of a cliche quote, but Thomas Edison said, I didn't fail at making light bulbs 99 times. I figured out 99 ways not to make a light bulb before I made one that worked. And, I think if you can start to look at those things not as failures, but as learning opportunities. And, I mean, we can go all the way back to primary school and the whole pressure to, like, get good grades instead of learn how to figure things out and learn over time and learn at our own pace. But I know you got some great questions.
No, well, I like your earlier point around how difficult it is on some days to get out of bed.
Yes.
I have those days, and I was wondering
We
how.
all do.
Yeah, how do you coax yourself out of that? How do you get yourself out? How do you get back in that upswing again?
Yeah.
Are there a few things that you do to do that?
Sure. I mean, I think the first one, and I really try to counsel entrepreneurs about this, is you got to really care about what you're doing.
Right.
If you don't have real passion for it, I mean, that's another, it seems like a cliche, but frankly, if you don't really care and have passion for it, you will not get out of bed every day and work 12 hours, 20 hours a day, all night when you have to. I mean, it just takes that at the beginning. And to echo what you were saying, I think too many news organizations are like, well, we tried that for 6 months and it doesn't seem to be paying off yet. I'm like, most entrepreneurs don't sleep for the first 2 years. So how did you expect that to be profitable in 6 months, especially when you're incubating it in this this monstrosity that's trying to kill it at the same time. That's really the challenge of most entrepreneurs. It's part of why I left. And all due respect to traditional media, I really hope people figure it out. I really support that. I hope the things I'm doing with digital entrepreneurs give people insights and ideas. But I care about journalism. And I care about journalism continuing. And the bright lights I see are people like you and others that are stepping out and saying, well, we're just going to go experiment with this till we see what works. And we're just going to figure out how to actually bring valuable information to our communities. And I work with people who do that in places, some of which have never had sources of information. I mean, go to rural Venezuela and meet my friend Nilsa, who started a local news site in a place where the only source of maybe credible news was Twitter occasionally. There was nothing else. You know, go to Mexico where people are getting killed to cover narcos. Go to Colombia where things have gotten so much better because journalists worked together and banded together and agreed to watch each other's backs in a very violent place. Those folks get me out of bed every morning. So even on those tough days, so you need something kind of bigger than yourself. If you're just like, I think I'm going to try and be an entrepreneur, maybe I'll get rich. I haven't seen too many people.
That's
make
a
it that
hobby.
way.
That's not
That's
a business.
hobby.
That's fun. Like, it's a cool hobby. But
Well, I think there's hobbies, there's business, and then there's passions.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you haven't picked up on it, I'm kind of passionate.
That's awesome. I think I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, love the, you have to be into the thing you do because it's going to take over your life and it's going to cause you to age like 2 decades. Like, when I started this business, I looked rather young and cool.
You still do?
Thanks.
In the right mirror?
I mean, look, man, everything's going a little bit downhill, but that's fine. That's fine.
It's worth it.
The other thing is people, like the people that you work with, I think are really important. Like every day, whether I like it or not, there are people who are counting on me to make sure that they get a paycheck, and they're doing hard work every day, and I have to do hard work for them too. I think there's also there are hacks to this. I have a very demanding calendar, and sometimes that like makes me want to kill myself. But also, it ensures that on the days that I am like not like particularly motivated, like there's something there that I have to show up for, and like that I have to be there for and be present for. And so it's like a reaffirmation, like every day when I open my calendar and I'm like, oh, I have this. Oh, this, I'm actually excited about this. And it's like, it's like you go through that thing of like stacking your day full of stuff, and some of it's not fun. And some of it is like really fun and really cool. Yeah. And ultimately, like I work with like some of the best people I've ever known. So it's a huge deal. And even when I was working in a really struggling newspaper that was full of like awesomely talented people, on the worst days, like a lot of times it was those people who got me out of bed and not like the work itself.
Questions?
Yes.
There are a couple of microphones floating around, but if you don't have one, just put up your hand.
Hey, my name is Nick, and I have a question about entrepreneurs having to deal with everything in the business and having some things that you're either bad at.
Do you want a hug,
or
Nick?
That you, what's
Do you want a hug?
afterward. Either that you're bad at or that you just really don't like doing, or it like stresses you out a ton. How do you motivate yourself to make sure those things happen and that like part of your business just doesn't completely atrophy?
I have a couple answers to that.
Go.
So first of all, I do an exercise with entrepreneurs that you might want to try, although it sounds like you're pretty self-aware, which is, what do you do better than anybody else you know that you get complimented for all the time? And by the way, most of us undervalue the things we do well because they come so naturally to us. And so I actually tell them they have to stand on their heads while they write the answer. And then they all look at me like I'm crazy, but they all end up all over the room with their feet up in the air. It's really a great exercise. And then after they do that, that's about getting them really present while they think about it. After they do that, I say, now I want you to make a list of all the things you don't do well or you hate doing. And you can make that list as long as you want. And they go on and on and on. I say, now this is how you should form your team. You should do the things you're best at. You should find other people to do those other things. And here's, a typical team. There's usually 20 people on a good team. And if you're the only one, you need to start thinking who can help you. And then at the end, if I have time, I say, I want you to think of 3 people you know who can either help you with that or introduce you to somebody who can help you with the things on that list. And often people walk out going, I didn't even think about it. My brother's an attorney. My wife's an accountant. And I'm like, you got a whole team in your family, and it never occurred to you to reach out to them. I think a lot of us have more resources in our networks than we realize. They don't have to be full-time employees. They can be part-time contractors. Board members are the cheapest way to get support because you're not allowed to pay them in most places. And often they will come in and help with things. And then I think at the end, you just have to deal with the fact that for the first couple of years, and I'm struggling with this right now, Summer Media is really growing. We're starting to have more and more things. We're working on a strategic plan for next year. We've got all these big ideas, but we still don't quite have the bandwidth. And there's this transition time that's really hard. And so I spent a lot of weekends doing bookkeeping and accounting and financial reports and grant writing. And I'm one of the few people on the team that speaks English well enough to do some of those things. And sometimes you just have to make yourself do that, and sometimes setting certain days and times to do that. My husband and I have a phrase about eating the frog every morning. So every morning I wake up and there's something on my to-do list that's the frog, and I try to eat the frog first. And then the rest of the day is a lot easier.
That's a great idea. I like
That's
eating the
great,
frog. Yeah, we do. I mean, I feel you on this, right? Like, you're not good at everything. You're not going to be good at everything. I think it's really, like, this is personal for me, and maybe it's because I'm an extrovert, and, like, humans are the thing that motivate me for everything. But I think doing solo entrepreneurship is, like, really, really hard, and I would never have survived.
Point, co-founders are key.
I mean, on our team, like, I have 2 co-founders. Bruce is, like, just a super creative dude. He's done a lot of like video agency work. He's like really fascinating. He's always bringing like nerdy, fun ideas into the mix. And Chris is like, he gets like how to talk to money people. He's like a snappy dressing young dude with like cool hair, and he talks finance really well. Like, he's good at that stuff. And then there's me, who, like, basically my job in this company is to keep the trains running, right? And sometimes that's meant, like, I'm doing all the tech and all the editorial, right? And, like, now it means, like, I'm managing people and making sure they have the resources they need and, like, all of that. But it's really, like, it is knowing your strength, and it's having people to do it with you. And I think the other piece of it is, like, you've got to make time to educate yourself. Like, I can't tell you how many business books, this is, like, the worst, right? Like, I don't like business books. And I've gotten, like, a business book MBA, I swear to God. Like, in year 1, it was like, ooh, financial statements, I don't know. So it's like you're in the library, like, and it sucks, right? Like, that's really hard because you actually have a job to do and you have to educate yourself at the same time. But you have to make that investment, and that's why I've aged 2 decades in 2 years or whatever. But there's no way around it. Like, you have to get good at some things that you suck at, and it's just that's just part of the game.
But as soon as you can, hire those people. I mean, the biggest mistake that I've seen of journalism entrepreneurs is that 2 or 3 journalists get together and start a business.
And it's all
as
journalism.
As soon as they get a little money, they hire another journalist. And I get it. I love journalists. They're the most fun people to work with. But as I like to say, if you start a restaurant and you only have chefs, who's going to attend to the customers? Who's going to order the food? Who's going to... you got to diversify that team, and I don't just mean male, female, and all the other ways to diversify, which are also very important, but really thinking about skills, and it's part of why I do that exercise with them.
And what was the first role that you hired for?
Okay, so I am completely guilty of not taking my own advice.
Just like the rest of us.
And that's part of why I'm in the fail fest. No, actually, I have a co-founder, and like you, we really got clear at the beginning what she's strong at and what I'm strong at and what makes sense. So she's very operationally focused. She's based in Argentina. She talks to the team on a regular basis.
She's
sets
me.
Really
That's
clear
my
goals. Her name is Michal Estrevner. She's amazing. We call her Midge. Nobody can pronounce her name in either language. Don't feel bad. But she's really focused on the team. She's really good at setting goals, and then if you don't make them, trying to help you figure out why, and then nurturing you through that. I'm really good at managing people like Midge, who are really good at managing themselves. So I'm much more externally focused. And I tend to confuse people with my management, because I'm like, so how do you feel like you should do that? What's the role you want in the company? And people are like, just tell me what to do. No, that's not how I nurture people into their best roles. So people have to kind of get used to my management style. But it turns out it works really well for me to manage managers and to kind of set the cooperative tone of the team. But that day-to-day management, oh my God, the best thing I ever did was hire somebody else who's better at that to do that and to be really focused on this team. Because a part-time virtual team of entrepreneurs, I mean, we're not just herding cats, we're herding tigers, And she's a really good tiger tamer. And I'm really good at letting tigers run all over the room and climb the walls. And we balance each other. So, even beyond just the specifics of jobs. But I'll confess something. One of the things we found in our study was that journalists put all their money into content, and then the one person raising money is the founder. And most of us don't have business backgrounds, although I've learned a lot about it along the way. And I'm going through this with my husband, who's on my board, and another woman, all the data, and we're looking at the statistics. And my husband looks at me and he's like, so let me get this straight. You have 22 people focused on content, and you're the fundraiser. And I was like, yeah, maybe I should change that. So, but it's really hard in my case, because Latin Americans are so much less expensive in terms of salaries than grant writers in the US. So I have an added challenge that I'm the most expensive person on the team. Thank goodness, and shout out, I have an ICFJ fellowship that pays for me, and all the money I raise goes to the rest of the team. Thank you, ICFJ. Thank you, ICFJ.
Yeah, okay, so when we started the company, basically the breakdown was like this. Chris was handling sales, fundraising, like money things. Bruce was handling like event production, some multimedia stuff. And I was managing freelancers, writing newsletters. We were all kind of like writing a newsletter every day, and working all of these things, right? But I was basically managing editorial, and I was building websites and doing all that shit. So the first thing I did was hire a journalist, because it's cheaper to hire one of those than people to build websites. So, that was a great addition, right? Because it relieved like this daily pressure of like producing the thing that could be published, and like we had already established great relationships with freelancers and all of this stuff. So it was an easy thing to just like turn over. The next person we hired after that was sales, right?
And that's applause. I want a round of applause for this brilliant entrepreneur, because seriously, that is so key.
Yeah, if you want to be a media entrepreneur, like you're totally right. Like the impulse is like, oh my God, this person does amazing XYZ journalism thing, but like what you need to do is figure out how to make money. So so we hired this great sales guy who's now like our expansion director, and he kind of runs our sales team, and he had just really excellent experience like working in events kind of things and working in membership. Like he had this really diverse experience, and he wasn't used to like selling ads, right? Or like agency work or any of that. So we were all kind of like learning how to do that as we were developing the business offering. And it worked out really well, although looking in hindsight, it could have been a total disaster. Like, thank God that guy, like Chris Adamo, we have too many Chris's. Like if I start a band, that's gonna be the band name, Too Many Chris's, because I think there's like 3 of them. But like, Adamo and Sofer were kind of going on these sales trips together, and we were sort of like, Bruce and I were sort of like, okay, what are we going to fulfill back here? And together we kind of figured all that out. But it's a hard thing, and it's really hard. I find it's really hard to hire for business talent first, because you don't know exactly what you're looking for, because you literally have no idea what your business is, and that's cool. So like if you can find people who are versatile and like who are excited about the mission of the company, that's another thing. Like you're never gonna, in a startup, like the biz dev guy that you want is not the dude who's like, I have like X salary requirement and I want this commission, and has no idea what they're selling, and they're like, I could sell anything. Like, I don't want that guy. Like, I want the guy who's like, hey, I'm really excited about what you guys are doing, and I want to help you learn how to make money off of it. Yeah, so that would be my advice on that.
Other questions? Arthur.
One for each
Thank you.
hand.
I'm coming from Moldova, from Eastern Europe. I'm trying to develop a media startup. Actually, I'm building a portfolio of media startups. Would you recommend me to look and find partnerships here in USA, or maybe for the companies here in USA, Europe is not that interesting, and I should focus more on Europe? What do you think?
Oh man, that's a great question. Without any knowledge of your business or its model, I can't give you great business advice here.
I can tell you, like,
talk a little bit about your
just
mission
a glimpse
and
of
how a
what it
partner
is.
here
So
would help.
Cometa is a social video news. It's the analog of nowadays. And the X42 is a software for audio and video comments. So basically, we allow people to leave video and audio comments up to 42 seconds to various questions and topics.
Cool, that sounds really
So
interesting.
that sounds almost more like a tech startup solution than a journalism project. But you said you have a portfolio, so it sounds like you have multiple things. A tool like that, I would say, obviously, you're looking for people who want to use it. Having partners all over the world probably makes sense, and I want to know more about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I just have to do a quick shout out, because here's another thing. journalists suck at promoting themselves. We're really good at telling everybody else's stories. We're horrible about telling our own. If there's somebody else in the room who has a startup or a media project, get the microphone, introduce yourself, take advantage of this opportunity, and then find a question to ask.
Absolutely.
You did that really well. I just have to say, my red tennis shoes, my cousin started this company. This is a public service announcement. He's a social entrepreneur in Kenya. These are the first running shoes ever made in Kenya, Africa. He did a Kickstarter campaign, raised enough money to start a shoe company. He's about to make the second batch. They come in red, green, and black. I'll stop now. It's Enda Running Shoes. He's awesome.
We'll
Are
send
any
the
of you
URL
guys
out
working
later.
on Kickstarter stuff, or any of you working on crowdfunding, any of that?
Yeah, we can talk about some transition around that. Yeah, tell us your Kickstarter experience.
So I'm a journalist in Detroit. My day job is I cover self-driving cars. But in
Oh my God, you're gonna have so much business in the next like 10 years. That's awesome.
yeah, no, absolutely. And it's hard to move away from that because the project I'm working on that I'd like to shift to is a documentary project around free healthcare in Detroit because a lot of the hospitals fled and a lot of the doctors fled. So there's all these informal attempts to keep people healthy, and it provides a really key insights to our healthcare system. So my problem is I'm great with the content. I've made a lot of the connections in the scene. I just don't know how to grow it to actually launching something. And so I'd like to kickstart. I'm going to some pitch competitions, but I don't really know how to say like, this is what I'm doing now, right? I don't know how to make that switch.
What kind of what kind of pitch competitions are you going to? I feel like journalism projects are really hard for pitch competitions unless they're pitch competitions about journalism projects.
Yeah, no, they're not.
Yeah, so like when you're doing a content focused thing, like the thing that you need to understand is like when you go into pitch space, they're looking for product, right? Like they're looking for
Scale.
Yeah. They're looking for scale.
don't understand what that
They're looking
means.
for like, how do I get my money out of this like really cute idea that this person has? And that is what they bet on, right? And so the thing that I would say is like it sounds like you have an amazing like content strategy and outreach strategy for what you're doing. And the thing that you need to the thing that I would take in if you're going to pitch it this way is like, what is the business opportunity there, and where is the niche, and like who is the market that you're serving, and going through like all of those steps of like how is the person that I'm pitching to, how are they going to make money on the thing that I am making? Because that is, and even if you're doing a nonprofit project, which may also be a good solution, it sounds like this could be a really awesome like grant funded thing. Grant funders in the journalism space, from my experience, they're not looking to fund content projects. They're looking to fund things that can be sustainable efforts in the world, right? So if you're like, we're gonna start in Detroit and we're gonna cover public and community health efforts, and this is how we're gonna start it, and then we're gonna go to these other cities and do it, like that is a compelling grant pitch. But like, I wanna do this awesome thing in Detroit that can do, like is just a one-off. Like, don't ever pitch a one-off because it's just like, you're not gonna get anywhere with it. So I think the thinking through like how you can make a thing scale, whether it's from a nonprofit lens or from a business lens, is the number one thing that you need to do.
Yeah, but how do you think about the problem that you're trying to solve? How do you frame that when someone were to ask you?
What do you mean?
Like what is a one thing that you want to achieve with this that gets at you every single day?
I guess I want to show that the debate we have around healthcare in this country is pretty stagnant and doesn't really illuminate a lot of the aspects of how it actually affects people. We usually just talk about insurance, right? So I want to highlight all these other issues and try and kind of shift the debate.
So that to me sounds like a really cool story, maybe a decent documentary. It doesn't sound like a business. And I think what she's saying, one thing a lot of journalists don't get is there's local newspaper, that might be a solid business. Consulting, that might be a solid business. It's not an investment opportunity. An investment opportunity is not the chicken store on the corner, the fried chicken store on the corner. It's Kentucky Fried Chicken in every city in the country, right? So investors want to say, oh, you've got the most popular restaurant in town, and now you've got the model and you can replicate it. So if I give you $1 million, you'll use that to build 3 more stores. You'll make $5 million, you use that to build 10 more stores. That's what investors want to hear. And you're totally right about foundations. They want to hear you're doing something nobody else has done that's a model for others, or you're doing something that's going to be self-sustaining soon because we're not going to give you money for the rest of your life. If you're doing a one-off documentary kind of project, or maybe it's another series of stories, you've already got some connections for self-driving cars. I'm not surprised that's a distraction because that's such a huge area. It's another challenge of a lot of entrepreneurs. We have too many interests. And those of us who are good at those things get really distracted. So I'm really good at this, so it's really hard to do this passion project I have because I'm so good at this, I keep doing it. I ran into that problem with books. I wrote 25 of them before I realized it really wasn't where my passion was. It took me a long time to learn some of these lessons. But seriously.
Speaking of fails, it's a terrible fail.
That's a horrible fail, I know.
Jeez.
It's weird when I tell people I'm a little embarrassed that I wrote 25 books. Most of them are dummies books, and they're kind of, yeah. I'll come back to that if you want. But my point is, get clear about what your idea is and where it fits in the spectrum of businesses, and you'll have a better chance finding support for it. So if you're going to, investors with a documentary, you have to go to investors that are interested in documentaries, not ones that are looking for scalable businesses that'll compete with Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Right, and
it's just not going to work.
One-off projects, though, like you can crowdfund those and like get really successful. Like here's a model, and then like maybe you do the project and you're like, okay, this is something I can replicate in every city across America to talk, to shine a new light on the American healthcare system, right? But you have this little foundation. That's the other thing too, is like, oh my God, I wish you had seen our first business plan. Like, look, when you start doing like pitches to investors, you have to have like 5 years of your business mapped out before you know what anything that you are doing, and it is ridiculous. It is absolutely just made up things that you have to have.
You pulled it out of your.
And you have to like make it up, but you have to also have just like enough understanding of like what's happening in the universe that it could be real, right? So
We might do this.
Yeah. So it's like that is like a tough thing to learn because you're a journalist. You're like, okay, this is the facts. I have $0, and I would like to make this thing, and I have no idea how much it's going to cost or how much money it's going to make. And you cannot, like, that is not how like the universe works. And that was a difficult thing for me to learn. Because it's like it's just like magic. Like it's like, oh, this is like, and you talk to people who've done that. But the Kickstarter crowdfunding approach for a one-off like content-driven project is a great way to see if there's a replicable, scalable, sustainable, long-term thing. I mean, it also requires that you give up your job for a year and focus on that, and you're probably going to make like a third of what you make right now. So I mean that's founder stuff. So
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it is a good question to ask yourself, what am I willing to give up? There's a wonderful entrepreneur in Colombia, and she said, I came to the conclusion that I was willing to sell my car if I had to make payroll, but not my apartment. So I told all my friends, if I sell my car, support me. If I put my apartment up for sale, stop me. You have to. There is something you have to be willing to risk.
Yeah,
to
I
do
make
this, and you have
less
to be
money
comfortable with
than
that.
I made 10 years ago.
But a lot of people do start kind of part-time nights and weekends till they get enough momentum that they can live on it, or at least, hopefully not starve on it.
It's also a thing of
till you
like-
get to a point of sustainability.
It's also
or
a thing of like, do I want to give myself a raise or do I want to hire more people? Like this is the thing that I'm always, and I always land on hire more people, and it's probably like a thing that I need to like learn. This is a current failure that I need to like learn because I'm like, I should hire more people because then I will have to do less work or I can do different work or whatever. But that is another thing that at this phase of my business is a really hard thing that I'm failing always at, like figuring that out.
I have a very real cautionary tale that I learned last night from somebody who's here. I won't call her out, but she said, I kept making more money and hiring more people, and then when I went to get investors, they were like, well, you don't even pay yourself. How are you making money?
Yeah.
And she said, I realized that not paying myself actually made it harder to get investment.
Yeah.
Because they said, well, if the manager's not getting paid, then there's no real business here. If you can't pay your own salary, you're not replaceable.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to invest in that either.
I'm working on it, Janine. I'm paying myself, but
Well,
still.
I'm not saying you can do that in the first year or two, but if you don't get to that point, at some point, it's not just you being selfless, it's you really not looking successful. We have a question over here.
Hi. So I work at Startland News, which is a startup publication covering startups out of Kansas City. And I've been there like a year. I am fresh out of school, 23. And I guess what I'm wondering is I've decided, based on reporting on like all the startup buzz there, that I want to do something like this and be a media entrepreneur. But when do you know it's the right time to like take the jump? And when do you know like, okay, maybe I should just stay at this newsroom and keep learning, or maybe, because for me, I have all these passion projects that I want to start, but I get home and at the end of the day, I'm burned out from writing. And
Absolutely.
I'm not really giving my passion projects enough love that they deserve, but I also don't really have much money. So like, I'm not really willing to risk anything yet because I don't have those things all the way yet. So any comments on that would be great.
Great question.
Alan, I bet you have good advice on that.
You know, there's never a good time to make that jump.
Truth.
Because there's always something else that you're up against. There's always a risk that seems bigger than sometimes it is. It really helps to have the right people around you. And I found that that was one of the key things that really propelled me into entrepreneurship. Just by having the right people around me that I knew I could trust to either give me advice, to give me support, give me training whenever I needed it. That to me was a big factor. But if you're looking for one clear line of sand where the lights come on and you know this is it, it'll never happen. You either take that plunge or you don't, or you take and you try it and you get a feel for what you're willing to give up. Janine's point earlier about it's about what you want to give up to get that.
Well, do you recommend easing into it?
So I think part of why it's hard to answer some of these questions is there's no clear path.
That's
And
right.
I've seen all of these different things work. I've seen people jump off the bridge and develop, a parachute on the way down and do amazing things.
Yeah.
I've also seen people quit their day jobs and regret it a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned at 23 with my first startup, and the little story I told at the beginning, was that I never wanted to try this again without at least a little more of my own resources to back me up. Because I didn't have anything to risk at that point. I was good at beg, borrowing, and stealing offices and volunteers and all that, but when it came to the edge, I had no cushion. And that's a really tough place to be an entrepreneur. There's a reason why they say before you become a consultant, you should have 6 months worth of living expenses saved. And half the room goes, 6 months? Geez, I've never had that much money in the bank.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's not a bad benchmark because the unpredictability and the tough part, and it's really hard to do that, give it your all, and pay all the other people on the team if you literally can't buy groceries this week or make your rent.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's impossible to be successful if you're not taking care of yourself. So I learned the hard way, and I really, especially for women, and for all of us who feel we must suffer for our art, your suffering does not make you better at entrepreneurship. Your being in a stable, secure place gives you the bandwidth to be a better
right.
entrepreneur. So, you taking another year or two, saving every penny you can, learning everything you can, starting to talk to everybody you can about your ideas, starting to think about the advisory board you want to have,
Yeah.
and then maybe taking that step when you've got a little more resources. If I could go back to your age, I would have tried to do it that way.
I think
know-
the other thing is like knowing really well what problem you want to solve. Like as you mentioned before, like what
Yeah, if
what
you're
is
not
the
clear on your
problem?
idea, you're not ready either.
That's that. Like I hear a lot of people actually like they're like I want to do a media startup, and I'm like, oh, for what, right? Like what is it about? Like all of those things. And I will say like there is never a good time. Make sure that you are taking care of number one, because like you're gonna sacrifice yourself in a lot of ways that you're not expecting. So like knowing that you're gonna be able to eat is like a really important factor here. The other thing I would say is like you need to build a network. Before you start a business, you need to build like a legit network. You need to know who has money. You need to know who can help you. You need to know people who will tell you when you're doing stupid shit. Like you need all of these people around you because there's no substitute for that stuff. Like being able to know who to call when you have no idea what you're doing is like an invaluable thing that will save your business over and over and over.
Okay, so I'm Spencer Graves. I'm also from Kansas City, actually a suburb in Kansas,
KC,
Overland
represent.
Park. I'm with 90.1 FM, KKFI, listener-sponsored radio, and what?
So listen to that
You
voice.
can tell by your voice.
And so I'd be pleased if you contact me. I'm Spencer Graves. I'm also I was a star reporter on my high school newspaper for the one semester of journalism that I had there, and since then I've spent 6 years in the Air Force during the Vietnam War. I'm an engineer, statistician, and I researcher on all kinds of stuff. And I came to the realization that progress on every substantive issue I can think of is blocked because every countermeasure threatens someone with substantive control over the media. And so I signed up I wrote a piece on endowment for journalism to try to actualize Robert McChesney's comments about citizen-directed subsidies for journalism. I got no money, just an idea, right? And I've also posted some stuff on everyone's favorite news site on Wikiversity. So those are like concept papers, but I don't have, like you said, the connections and the network, and I need collaborators and entrepreneurs to help me figure out where to go with this next.
Do you have a business plan?
That's what I don't, yeah, correct. My sort of business plan right now is I'm working with Friends of Community Media there in Kansas City, and they're doing, they've been doing a monthly forum series, and I've and the next one is going to be a webinar that I plan to record and post on the web, so that, and the speaker is a guy named Louis Friedland, who's a professor of journalism at Wisconsin.
Spencer, it sounds like a really noble idea. I think, maybe as a lesson for all of us to think about, a lot of people probably come to both of us with, I've got an idea, I have no money, and I have no support yet, is a really tough place to start helping you. And I think the first step when you have an idea or when you're thinking about being an entrepreneur is research. And I love to tell journalists, you already have the most important skills you need as an entrepreneur in the modern world, because things are constantly changing, and you're the best researchers in the world. The same way you learned how to cover commercial fishing, bilingual education, whatever budget meeting you went to, you can learn how to do accounting and budgeting and business plans and all the other stuff. It's the same skills. It's how I taught myself everything I've learned. So maybe start with that. Start with research. Start with thinking about how other people have done similar things. Learn everything you can about them, and then start to collect people. And a lot of times in that research, you find those allies. I see a question. I love that. She said, I have a side business. I have a side business that supports my journalism addiction. I often say you need a side gig to support your habit. Yeah. Can we get her a microphone for the camera?
Yeah.
She's talking about SCORE. If
SCORE
you don't
is
know
great.
it,
Yeah.
it's retired professionals that help entrepreneurs. It's a great resource.
So basically, they come from, they could be marketing executives, they could be, you name it, and they have time on their hands, and they are volunteering to help you put together a business plan. And sometimes just hearing yourself pitching idea to a professional makes all the difference. They're not your friends, they're not just nodding for you because they like you. It helped a lot. So yeah, they helped me develop a business plan, Also, because sometimes when you're working for yourself, it's okay if I don't make that much money. You can't go to them and talk like that, So just look them up,
It's a great resource.
That's great.
SCORE, it's an acronym. You can look it up.
Thank you. First, thank you all so much. This has been fantastic. Thanks for being so candid. So you talked a lot about, and this sort of bookends the other story about how do you get started, but you've all talked a lot about pivoting and evolving, and I prefer the word evolving to failing, but whatever.
I like that.
Semantics. But when do you know it's time to stop and go to the next thing? That you're owned by whatever the previous thing was. It's not just going to pivot or evolve. When do you let go? And maybe it's examples you can share from other people.
Yeah.
Maybe not personal, or maybe personal.
I actually created a little segment I do in workshops for people who are already entrepreneurs. It's cuando debes pivotear o persistir, when you should persist, when you should pivot. And so I kind of go through, and if you look at what other companies have done, it's impressive how many of the companies we have today, Twitter started as a podcasting thing, YouTube started as a matchmaking site. Like, you wouldn't realize that. Flickr started as an online game. Like, those are major pivots that led to kind of interesting successes, but weren't where they started. But then the other side of when do you actually sometimes you're really close to success and you just don't realize it. Most people give up when they're about to be successful. But some people push through till they're absolutely, devastated and exhausted, and you have to figure out where that line in the sand is. But I have 7 questions, and just a couple of them to help you think. Do I still care about this enough to keep doing it? are there other people who are encouraging me to do it and will help me? And could I ask them for more help than I've gotten already? You know, do I have any resources at all? If you have no money in the bank, no energy left, and nobody's supporting you, that's a pretty clear answer. You just haven't accepted yet. But if you're just burned out, and you have a lot of people who want to support you, and maybe people who'd support you more if you asked the right way, sometimes you just need a weekend off. And sometimes the best thing an entrepreneur can do before they make that decision is to literally disconnect for at least a few days and then revisit that decision fresh. Because burnout is the worst way to make any decision, and it's almost a constant problem for anybody with a newborn or an entrepreneurial project.
I think another way of looking at that is to ask yourself, what would a breakthrough look like to make this happen? And what would that timing look like? And am I in a position to actually make that happen? You know, to trigger that breakthrough. And very often, if it's a market force that you're up against, and it's a timing issue that you're up against, you know, sometimes you just got to take a few steps back and go, timing's off. You know, and it's not your fault.
I want to say one more thing about asking for help, because it's another problem I see a lot with journalists, and not just women journalists, but all journalists. And that is, it's one thing to say, I have an idea, I have nothing, help. It's another thing to say, what my friends in Venezuela said in their kickstarting campaign, there's a problem here. Journalism's not being done right. The government controls the media. This is a serious issue for all of us. Me and my partner, we're dedicated journalists, we're experienced, we're out here, we're gonna work really hard, and we need your help to do it. If you can make that kind of case, there's a problem, I think we can solve it with your help, here's how you can help me. If you can get those 3 points clear, you will get much better response than, I have this cool idea, I don't know where to start. Or, I'm thinking about this, but I don't have any support yet. Get to the point where you're clear on the problem you're solving, you're clear about articulating why you're the right person to solve it, and you're specific about what we need to do to support you, and the support you get will transform.
We can take one more question, and we've got to wrap this up.
I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about how you build. You kind of mentioned it. You got to find people that tell you when you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. How do you build that network, and how do you differentiate people who don't understand your vision from people who can tell you with knowledge and experience
Great
that
question.
you're
Go
wrong?
for it.
I like that.
Yeah, here, okay.
No, it's okay. All right, so this is like, there's no great answer here. I think like the number one thing is like, know your crap, like know your shit before you go in there, right? Like, what do you want? Like this framework of like, this is the problem, this is what I want to do about it, here's how I think you can help. Like when you tell people that, some people are going to be like, yes, make it rain, like whatever. Very few. Most people are going to be like, but what about this, bozo, right? And those people are super valuable. And there are going to be a lot of people who tell you no, who are going to be people that will help you actually form your business, like even though they're not like directly like benefiting you as an investor or whatever. I think the other thing is like, not everything in your life is transactional. Like when you meet people who are cool and smart and doing amazing things, those are people that you should know because they're going to make you smarter. Like I really do believe that like the school of fish that you swim in, like that determines a lot about your trajectory as well, right? So, and a lot of times you're gonna be like the little fish, like swimming around with like all these cool, amazing people that you've admired, and like you're just like literally just like, I wanna just understand like how you view the world, and like I'm working on this thing, and how can you help me just by understanding what you're working on, right? So I think there's this thing, I hang out in startup communities a lot, and the thing that I see most of all that like is not a way to network is everything is not a transaction, right? Like some of what you're doing is literally trying to educate yourself, and people who are successful at those things are going to be that education for you, but they're not gonna like give you money, or they're not gonna like drag you through like the process of doing fundraising. I don't know, like that's one of the biggest things that I see from new founders is like they go to everyone with like their pitch and that's it, but it's not, that's actually very rarely why people get interested in you and what you're doing. It's because they see your work and they see that you're persistent.
Start thinking about what you can do for them before you ask.
Exactly.
It's a good thing to do. I think a lot of new entrepreneurs underestimate the value of an advisory board. I think it's one of the best first steps. Think about the people you most admire, whose skills might be most useful to you, and go and give them the respect they deserve and say, I want to put you on my advisory board. It's not a legal board yet. My board originally had a couple people that said, we're the board that thinks Janine's idea isn't completely crazy. Like, that was what they called themselves. But they gave me a sounding board, and I purposely had people on that board that I knew would counter me, and I purposely had the people on that board that would always say I was awesome. And some days I needed one, and some days I needed the other. So balancing that is also key.
I really love people who push you, though. Yeah.
You've been an awesome facilitator. I know we're out of time.
Thank you,
We're out
Alan.
of time, so thank you so much for the advice. I think that's
You
very
guys are
frank. Rebecca, Janine, thank you, and I guess we'll be around.
Yeah, awesome.
Have a great day, everyone.
Hey, what's up?